President Trump's purge of top officials at the Department of Homeland Security fueling fears even inside the Republican Party. Senior Senator Chuck Grassley tells the Washington Post he's, quote, very, very concerned, end quote. And CNN has learned the president is pushing to reinstate his controversial family separation policy. Joining us now is Independent Senator Angus King. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Allison. How are you?
I'm well. So you say that the dismissal of Secretary Nielsen should worry everyone. Why is that?
Well, I think on a couple of levels. It's not only Secretary Nielsen. I counted up this morning. I counted 13 empty positions or acting positions. I don't even think they're acting at the top of the Department of Homeland Security. And this is, you know, we're talking the Secret Service, we're talking immigration, all of those important functions. So that's a concern, I think, for us. But deeper than that is, why were these people being fired? It appears they were being fired for the offense of telling the president that what he wants to do is against the law. And when you get fired, when you start firing people because they tell you you have to follow the law, you know, that's a really bad sign, Allison.
Here's what Senator Ron Johnson, Republican, not a critic of the president routinely. Here's what he says about this. He echoes your concerns. I'm concerned with a growing leadership void within the department tasked with addressing some of the most significant problems facing the nation. And so, Senator, just help us understand, is the Department of Homeland Security such a kind of big, chugging juggernaut that it can just go on doing its work without those 13 people, or is it truly a risk to American safety?
Well, I think it is a risk. And you know, there are thousands of good people who are going to get up this morning working for Homeland Security, whether it's in the Coast Guard or Customs and Border Patrol. All of those people, they're going to go to work. They're going to do their jobs. But when you don't have leadership at the top, when you see people being fired for essentially doing their jobs, it's got to be corrosive of the morale and the effectiveness of the agency. So that's a concern in itself. But as I said, what really concerns me is the deeper issue of a guy who can't stand to have people around him who tell him what he doesn't want to hear. That's a looming disaster for a president or for any leader. Because you're shutting out diverse voices, and that's what you need, and particularly when you're shutting out people for telling you that you have to follow the law. The problem, Allison, I think, a friend of mine said a while ago, this guy thinks he's CEO of America and it's a family-owned company. He doesn't have to answer to anybody. I was listening to some of his quotes this morning. He wants to get rid of the judges. He says we don't need the judges, and tell the judges what, you know, don't worry about them. Don't worry about Congress. That's not the way our system works. You've got to learn to work to make changes, to get the policies enacted that you want. You can't just bull through these things.
Senator, that's not the way democracy works. I mean, I hear you loud and clear. And so the reporting that Jake Tapper has from two sources that on Friday, the president told border agents, ban asylum seekers, ban all migrants, ban asylum seekers at the border, and tell the judges that you're going to do it. Tell the judges that what they say doesn't matter. Do you think that is breaking? Was he telling border agents to break the law?
Well, it was pretty damn close. I don't know. I don't know how you define it any other way, that he's telling people, you know, to ignore the law. Let me back up one step further, Allison. I used to be the governor in the state of Maine and would get frustrated with the legislature. I'd get mad and I'd say, why aren't they doing what I want? They're not listening. They're not doing the policies that I think are important for the state. And then I had a kind of moment where I realized, wait a minute, if they're not doing what I think is important, that's on me. It's my responsibility to find a way to work with them to get those policies enacted. He hasn't reached that point yet. He thinks he can just, run over everybody. And if he doesn't like the law that Congress passed years ago, he can just ignore it or tell his people to ignore it. He's got to figure out, if he wants to get something done, he's got to figure out how to sit down with Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, McCarthy, all of those people, and try to persuade them to get the policies that he wants. The wall thing is a perfect example. He didn't get the money that he wanted from a bipartisan Congress, bipartisan appropriations process. So he says, well, the heck with you. I'm going to just run you and do this national emergency. That shreds our Constitution and the democratic system, as you said.
Senator, what do you think of the president wanting to bring back the family separation policy?
I think it's terrible. You know, ironically, he's the one who said a couple of months ago, we have a humanitarian crisis. Well, we do, so he wants to make it worse. It hasn't worked. I think they thought it was going to be some kind of deterrent. People leaving these terribly violent, unstable countries are having to make a judgment. You know, how I have a chance at a decent life in Mexico or in the United States versus virtually no chance in my neighborhood in Guatemala or Honduras, and they're going to make that call and they're going to go and take their chances. And the idea that you're going to use a family separation policy, which is humane under any definition, as a deterrent is shocking. It didn't work before. It's not going to work now. It's just going to cause more problems. And again, it's a defiance of the law.
Senator Chuck Grassley is speaking out, actually, and criticizing one of President Trump's top advisors, Stephen Miller, who is apparently the architect of the family separation policy. And here's what Chuck Grassley told the Washington Post. I think it would be hard for him to demonstrate he's accomplished anything for the president, Grassley said. When asked to elaborate, the senator chuckled and added, it's pretty hard to elaborate on it when there hasn't been any accomplishments. Do you think politically it is significant that these Republican senators who have been reluctant to speak out in the past against President Trump or his policies are doing so now about this?
I think it is significant, and I think they're doing what their job is, which is to try to defend the country and work on behalf of their constituents. And everybody, by the way, I should have said at the very beginning, nobody here that I've ever met wants open borders. And the idea that the president and the vice president keep throwing out that you're either for the wall and these harsh, inhumane policies, or you're for open borders is nonsense. What the people around here that I'm talking to on both sides of the aisle, is a sensible policy that deals with some of these issues. For example, the asylum issue. By the way, asylum seekers are not illegal immigrants. They're coming in under the law. They have an opportunity to request asylum. Then they have to be processed through the immigration court, which is grossly understaffed. So one solution would be to more immigration judges. The other solution, it seems to me, is to work with those countries in Central America to try to stabilize them so that you don't have these refugee flows to start with. Instead, the administration is cutting funding to those countries. And I know there are corruption problems. We've got to work with those. Yeah. But to cut funding, to make it worse down there, is just self-defeating.
Senator, very quickly, I know that you're not on the committee that will be hearing from Attorney General Bill Barr today, but if you were, or perhaps you've told your colleagues for tomorrow in the Senate, what do you most want to hear from him?
I want to say, Mr. Barr, turn over that report. I think that's the simple. You want a short answer, that's the short answer. We need to see the report. The committees of Congress can handle classified material. We ought to have it, and ultimately the American people ought to see it.
Senator Angus King, thank you very much for weighing in on all of this for us.
Sure.
John.
It's always disorienting when you get a short answer.
No, I know.
To a basic question.
I should have just sat there and stared at him with dead air for a while.
Really? That's the answer?